The sky over Neo-Tokyo 2099 pulsed with a kaleidoscope of neon lights, reflecting off the rain-slicked streets. Hovercars zipped through the air, their hum blending with the distant wail of sirens. In the midst of this technological chaos, Jake Kimura sat in the cramped workspace of Kimura Repairs, the modest shop he'd inherited from his late father. Jake was a grease-streaked genius who could repair almost anything mechanical, digital, or alien. Earth had seen its fair share of alien tech ever since the first contact incident 20 years ago, when a galactic war had spilled into the solar system. Though the aliens left, remnants of their advanced technology remained, often scavenged and resold by opportunistic corporations. Jake had an uncanny knack for reverse engineering these devices, a skill that brought in just enough money to keep the shop's lights on. Tonight was like any other. He was elbows deep in the guts of an old hoverbike, coaxing life back into the sputtering engine, when his comlink buzzed. He wiped his hands on a rag and tapped the holographic display that popped up. The message was brief and cryptic: job offer. Location: 22 degree 30 foot 01.8 inch N 114 degrees 13 minutes 42.6 seconds east. Payment upon completion, 50,000 credits. Jake's brow furrowed. 50,000 credits? That was more money than he usually saw in a year. But the coordinates placed the job somewhere outside the city, near an old alien excavation site. It wasn't uncommon for scavengers to find damaged alien tech and hire mechanics to salvage it. Still, the lack of detail felt off. Curiosity won out. He packed his tools, hopped onto his freshly repaired hoverbike, and sped off into the night. The ride to the coordinates was uneventful, though Jake couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in his gut. The city lights gave way to the dark, sprawling ruins of a long-abandoned industrial complex. The coordinates led him to an underground entrance concealed by rubble. After some effort clearing the debris, Jake descended into the darkness, his helmet's headlamp illuminating the damp, metallic walls of a hidden corridor. At the end of the tunnel, he entered a vast, dimly lit chamber. The air was thick with the hum of alien machinery. In the center of the room stood a towering cage, its bars made of shimmering silver light that seemed alive, pulsating and twisting like liquid energy. Inside the cage was something massive, its silhouette barely discernible in the low light. Jake stepped closer, and his heart stopped. The creature within wasn't some ancient alien machine or leftover tech. It was alive. A dragon. Its colossal form was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. The creature's body was covered in scales that shimmered like fragments of the night sky, each one a swirling galaxy. Wings folded tightly against its back, it lay chained in a forced slumber, the silver light forming intricate loops around its limbs. "What the hell?" Jake whispered, taking an involuntary step back. Dragons weren't supposed to be real, yet here one was, imprisoned in a forgotten bunker beneath the city. He glanced around, spotting a console nearby. Alien runes glowed faintly on its surface. Jake approached cautiously, his mechanic instincts kicking in. The console was advanced, but its mechanisms were familiar enough for him to decipher its purpose. This wasn't just a cage, it was a stasis prison, designed to hold something unimaginably powerful. The creature's chains were a blend of energy fields and alien alloys, and they drew power from a central core buried deep within the console. As he steadied the controls, Jake's comlink buzzed again. A new message appeared: deactivate. No questions. Jake hesitated. He had no idea who his client was, but he'd been hired to disable this system. Was freeing this thing the right choice? What if it was dangerous? What if it deserved to be locked away? But then he looked at the dragon again. Even in its slumber, it seemed noble, majestic. The faint rise and fall of its massive chest reminded him of a wounded animal, trapped and helpless. Jake felt a pang of sympathy. He took a deep breath and began working. His fingers moved deftly across the console, bypassing layers of alien encryption. As he worked, the chains began to flicker, their light dimming. The room trembled slightly, the hum of energy growing louder. "This is either the best decision of my life," Jake muttered, "or the absolute worst." The final sequence of commands unlocked the core. With a brilliant flash, the chains disintegrated into sparks, and the hum of the machinery fell silent. Jake shielded his eyes as a wave of energy rippled through the chamber. When he looked up, the dragon was awake. Two glowing, azure eyes locked onto him. They radiated an intelligence far beyond anything Jake had encountered. He froze, his heart pounding in his chest as the dragon stretched its wings, its movements slow and deliberate, like a storm gathering strength. Then, without moving its mouth, it spoke. Its voice echoed directly in Jake's mind, deep and resonant like the tolling of a cosmic bell. "You, human, have freed me." "Why?" Jake's mouth went dry. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to meet the creature's gaze. No one deserves to be locked up like that. The dragon studied him for what felt like an eternity, its eyes piercing and unreadable. Finally, it spoke again. "Your answer is acceptable. I am Lithorex, the guardian of the Astrolix galaxy. For centuries, I stood against the void shadows, protectors of balance and life. But I was betrayed and bound here, far from my home." Lithorex lowered his head, bringing it closer to Jake. "By freeing me, you have proven yourself worthy. Now, I choose you." "Choose me for what?" Jake asked, his voice trembling. The dragon's next words sent a shiver down his spine. "To be my bondmate. Together, we shall defend this world and others." Before Jake could react, Lithorex extended a single claw, touching Jake's chest. A surge of energy coursed through him, flooding his mind with visions of galaxies, ancient wars, and alien knowledge. He gasped as his body felt both weightless and brimming with power. When the surge subsided, Lithorex folded his wings, his massive form now calm but no less imposing. "You are no longer just a mechanic, Jake Kimura. You are the Guardian's chosen. Your destiny begins now." Jake stared at the dragon, still trying to process what had just happened. He'd taken the job for a paycheck, but now, he had no idea what he'd just signed up for. The chamber was eerily silent as Jake tried to process the sheer absurdity of what had just occurred. The massive dragon Lithorex, it called itself, towered over him, its celestial-scaled body shimmering faintly in the dim light. Jake felt an unfamiliar weight settle on his chest, as though the energy surge from earlier had left a physical mark. He glanced down to find a faint glow emanating from his skin, a pattern of intricate alien glyphs pulsating briefly before fading. "I didn't sign up for this," Jake muttered under his breath, stepping back instinctively. "You chose this the moment you freed me," Lithorex said, its deep voice resonating not in the air but directly in Jake's mind. "There is no undoing the bond now." "Bond?" Jake sputtered. "Look, I was hired to dash," he stopped himself. Whoever had hired him clearly knew what was in this chamber. And if they had left a powerful being like this locked up, what had they been planning? Jake shook his head. "I don't know what you think I can do. I'm a mechanic, not a whatever you're expecting." Lithorex's eyes narrowed, the glowing orbs glinting with something between amusement and exasperation. "You underestimate yourself, human. The bond one have bestowed upon you is not random. I chose you for your resourcefulness, your courage, and your compassion. These qualities make you more than a mere mechanic." Before Jake could argue further, the ground trembled. Distant vibrations grew into a low rumble, and dust cascaded from the chamber walls. Lithorex's gaze shifted to the entrance of the underground facility. "They are coming," he said grimly. "Who's coming?" Jake asked, fear creeping into his voice. "Those who imprisoned me," Lithorex replied. "I can sense their machines closing in. They will not allow me to leave here alive, and now, they will target you as well." A sharp, metallic sound echoed down the corridor Jake had entered through. He turned to see beams of cold white light slicing through the darkness, accompanied by the whir of mechanical servos. A squad of humanoid drones, sleek and angular, marched into the chamber, their weapons aimed at Lithorex. Jake instinctively ducked behind a pillar, but Lithorex stood his ground. The dragon's wings unfurled, filling the chamber, and he roared a sound that shook the walls and sent waves of pressure rippling outward. The drones staggered but held their formation. "Jake," Lithorex said, his voice calm despite the chaos. "The bond has awakened latent abilities within you. Use them." Jake peeked out from his cover, eyes wide. "Abilities? What are you talking about? I don't know how to fight these things." "Trust the bond," Lithorex replied. "It will guide you." Before Jake could respond, one of the drones locked onto his position and fired. A searing bolt of plasma zipped past, melting part of the pillar he was hiding behind. Instinctively, Jake raised his hands, and to his shock, a translucent barrier of light materialized in front of him. The plasma bolt dissipated against it harmlessly. "What the hell?" Jake whispered, staring at his glowing hands. "Good," Lithorex said. "Now, fight." The next few minutes were a blur. Jake moved with a speed and precision that felt both foreign and familiar, dodging plasma bolts and hurling bursts of energy from his hands. The bond between him and Lithorex seemed to flow through him, granting him reflexes and skills he couldn't explain. Meanwhile, Lithorex unleashed his fury. With a swipe of his claw, he tore through a group of drones, their metallic bodies crumpling like paper. His tail lashed out, smashing others into the chamber walls. When a larger, heavily armored drone entered the fray, Lithorex inhaled deeply and exhaled a torrent of blue fire, reducing it to molten slag. Despite their initial advantage, the sheer number of drones pouring into the chamber began to overwhelm them. Jake found himself backing toward Lithorex, his energy reserves dwindling with each shield he conjured and each bolt he fired. "We need to get out of here," Jake shouted, his voice cracking under the strain. "I am weakened from my imprisonment," Lithorex admitted. "But together, we can escape." "How?" The dragon's eyes glowed brighter. "Climb onto my back." Jake hesitated, glancing at the chaos around him. Another plasma bolt sizzled past, and he made his decision. Scrambling up Lithorex's flank, he clung to the dragon's spiny ridges as Lithorex crouched, preparing to leap. The dragon roared again, and with a powerful beat of his wings, they surged upward. The chamber ceiling crumbled as Lithorex barreled through it, sending debris raining down on the drones below. Jake held on for dear life as they emerged into the open night sky, rain pelting his face and wind whipping past him. They soared over the outskirts of Neo-Tokyo, the city lights stretching out like a web of stars beneath them. Jake felt a mix of terror and exhilaration as Lithorex's powerful wings carried them higher and faster than he'd ever traveled before. Below, more drones and hovercrafts pursued, their spotlights cutting through the darkness. "We're not going to outrun them, are we?" Jake yelled over the wind. Lithorex's voice was steady. "Not in my current state. I require time to fully recover. But we can make a stand where the odds favor us." "Great. Any ideas?" Lithorex banked sharply, heading toward the jagged cliffs on the city's eastern edge. "There is an ancient site near the ocean. It will serve as our battleground." Jake groaned. "You could have mentioned the battleground part before I signed up for this." The cliffs loomed ahead, their rocky faces battered by the relentless waves of the Pacific. Lithorex landed on a wide plateau, his claws digging into the wet stone. Jake slid off, his legs shaky from the flight. "Prepare yourself," Lithorex said. "They will not relent until we show them the true strength of our bond." Jake clenched his fists, feeling the faint flicker of the energy within him. He looked up at Lithorex, who was already turning to face the incoming drones. "Okay," Jake muttered to himself, adrenaline surging. "Let's do this." The bond between them hummed, and Jake felt an unshakable certainty settle over him. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore, he was part of something far greater. Together, they would fight, and together, they would survive. The battle on the cliffs had been brutal but decisive. Lithorax and Jake had fought as one, their newfound bond amplifying their abilities. The drones and hovercrafts were obliterated, their shattered remnants swept into the ocean below. Yet the victory came with a stark realization Earth was no longer safe for them. Lithorax's captors would send more forces, and next time, they would come with even deadlier weapons. Standing on the cliff's edge, Jake wiped the sweat from his brow and stared at the horizon, the city's glow faint in the distance. His thoughts were interrupted by Lithorax's rumbling voice. "We must leave," the dragon said. His majestic form glowed faintly in the moonlight, though his movements were still sluggish from his imprisonment. "This world cannot withstand the battles to come. The void shadows will follow my trail here, and their devastation is absolute." Jake looked at him, still processing the gravity of the situation. "Void shadows? What are they?" "They are the darkness that devours light," Lithorax replied. "Parasitic entities born from the void between galaxies. They consume worlds, leaving nothing behind but desolation. I was their greatest adversary until I was betrayed and imprisoned." Jake's stomach churned. "And now they're coming here?" "Not yet," Lithorax said. "But they will. My freedom has rekindled their hunt." Jake let out a shaky breath. "So, what's the plan? Hide? Fight?" Lithorax turned his glowing eyes to Jake. "We must take the fight to them. But first, we need allies." "Allies?" Jake raised an eyebrow. "You mean, like, other dragons?" "There are no others," Lithorax said solemnly. "I am the last of my kind. But there are those in the galaxies who remember what I fought for, who owe me their loyalty. We must find them." Jake glanced back at the city. The thought of leaving Earth was almost too much to process, but deep down, he knew there was no going back. Whatever this bond had done to him, it had tied his fate to Lithorax and the battles ahead. "All right," Jake said, steeling himself. "How do we get off this rock?" The answer was more awe-inspiring than Jake could have imagined. Lithorax wasn't just a living, breathing dragon, he was also a starship. At least, that was how Jake's mechanic brain interpreted it. As they soared into the upper atmosphere, Lithorax began to glow, his scales radiating cosmic energy. His body shimmered and shifted, morphing into a sleek, winged vessel of light and metal. Jake, now seated in what could only be described as a cockpit nestled within Lithorax's heart, marveled at the seamless fusion of biology and technology. "You've got to be kidding me," Jake muttered, running his hands over the smooth, glowing panels in front of him. "You're a dragon and a spaceship?" "I am a being of the stars," Lithorax replied, his voice resonating through the cockpit. "Such forms are merely extensions of my essence." Jake's hands moved instinctively across the controls. Despite having never piloted a spaceship in his life, he found the interface intuitive, as if the bond between him and Lithorax had implanted the knowledge directly into his mind. "Where are we headed first?" Jake asked. "To the Astrolix Nebula," Lithorax replied. "There is a colony there, one of the last strongholds against the void shadows. They will aid us." The stars blurred as Lithorax engaged his faster-than-light propulsion, and Jake felt his stomach lurch at the sudden acceleration. As they streaked through the void, Jake stared out at the swirling bands of color and light beyond the cockpit, a mixture of fear and exhilaration coursing through him. The journey to the Astrolix Nebula took only hours, but to Jake, it felt like an eternity. He spent the time familiarizing himself with Lithorax's systems and learning more about the galaxy's vast history. Through the bond, Lithorax shared fragments of his memory's epic battles against the void shadows, alliances forged across distant worlds, and the tragic betrayal that led to his imprisonment. When they finally exited faster-than-light travel, Jake's breath caught in his throat. The Astrolix Nebula was a swirling sea of vibrant colors, its gases forming massive, luminous tendrils that stretched across the void. Nestled within it was a massive space station, its design unlike anything Jake had ever seen. Shaped like a crystalline lotus, it glowed with a soft, golden light, its petals rotating slowly as it orbited a dying star. "That's our destination?" Jake asked. "Yes," Litharax said. "The Celestia Nexus. It is home to the Erythian Order, ancient scholars and warriors who once stood with me against the Void Shadows. They may still remember their oath." As they approached, smaller ships emerged from the station, their sleek designs reminiscent of birds of prey. Jake's grip tightened on the controls, but Litharax's voice calmed him. "They will not attack unless provoked." A voice crackled over the comms, speaking in an alien language. To Jake's surprise, he understood it perfectly, thanks to the bond. "Unidentified vessel, state your purpose." "I am Litharax, guardian of the Astrolix Galaxy," the dragon replied. "I seek an audience with the Erythian Council." There was a pause, then the ships fell back, escorting them toward the station. Inside the Celestia Nexus, Jake found himself surrounded by beings of all shapes and sizes. The Erythians were tall, crystalline creatures with translucent skin that shimmered like glass. Their movements were graceful, their voices melodic, yet their eyes betrayed a sharp intelligence. The leader of the council, an imposing figure named Solinar, greeted them in a grand chamber filled with floating orbs of light. "Litharax, it has been many lifetimes since we last saw you. We feared you were lost." "I was betrayed," Litharax said, his voice carrying a weight of sorrow. "But I have returned." The void shadows stir once more. "We must prepare." Solinar's expression darkened. "The void shadows have already begun their advance. Entire systems have fallen silent. We feared the worst." "Then you know what must be done," Litharax said. "Will you honor your oath?" Solinar hesitated, glancing at Jake. "And who is this human you bring with you?" Jake stepped forward, feeling out of place among the towering aliens. "I'm Jake Kimura. Mechanic from Earth. I freed him." A ripple of murmurs passed through the council. Solinar's gaze lingered on Jake, then returned to Litharax. "Very well. The Erythian Order will stand with you, Guardian. But you must understand this fight will not be like the last. The Void Shadows are stronger than ever." Litharax inclined his head. "With unity, we can prevail." Jake couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. He might be out of his depth, but for the first time, he felt like he was truly part of something greater. As they left the council chamber, Jake turned to Litharax. "So, what's next?" "We rally more allies," Litharax said. "And then, we take the fight to the Void Shadows." Jake nodded, a determined look on his face. "All right. Let's do it." The stars awaited, and with them, the battle for the galaxy's future. The Celestia Nexus buzzed with activity. Erythian warriors armed themselves with shimmering energy weapons, while ships docked and departed from the crystalline petals of the station, carrying urgent messages to distant allies. The Erythian Order had begun mobilizing for war, and Litharax's return sparked hope that had long since faded. Jake, however, couldn't shake the weight pressing on his shoulders. The Void Shadows weren't just an enemy, they were a force of annihilation. Entire systems had been consumed by them, their inhabitants reduced to dust. Standing in the heart of the Nexus, surrounded by towering aliens and glowing artifacts, Jake felt impossibly small. But Litharax's voice broke through his doubt. "The bond we share is not one of chance, Jake. The strength within you will carry us forward." Jake nodded, though his resolve felt fragile. "So, this is it? We take the fight to them?" Litharax's glowing eyes narrowed. "No. They will come to us." The Void Shadows arrived in the Orion Nebula with the quiet inevitability of a gathering storm. Tendrils of darkness rippled through the swirling clouds of gas and light, consuming stars as they advanced. Their ships massive, black obelisks that seemed to drink the light around them emerged from the void, carrying an aura of cold, malevolent purpose. On board the Celestra Nexus, Jake stood in a command chamber with Solinar and other Erythian leaders. A holographic map displayed the advancing enemy fleet, their numbers staggering. "There's no way we can beat that," Jake muttered. The Void Shadows vastly outnumbered their forces. Even with Litharax and the Erythian Order, the odds seemed impossible. Solinar spoke, his voice calm but firm. "If the Void Shadows reach this station, the Nexus and the entire Astrolix Nebula will fall. Our only hope is to confront them before they can consolidate their power." Litharax's voice rumbled through the chamber. "The Shadows fear unity. Alone, we are vulnerable, but together, we are their greatest threat. We will not let them consume this galaxy." Jake swallowed hard, his mind racing. "Okay, but what's the plan?" "We're outgunned, outnumbered." Litharax interrupted. "The Void Shadow's strength lies in their Nexus core, a massive vessel that coordinates their forces and anchors their essence. If we destroy it, their fleet will collapse." Jake frowned. "And how do we get close enough to do that?" Solinar raised a crystalline arm, and a smaller hologram appeared, a blueprint of a sleek, heavily armed ship. The Starlance, a prototype built for this purpose. It's fast, durable, and designed to pierce even the strongest shields. But it will require a pilot and a co-pilot to guide it to the core. Jake realized they were all looking at him. "Me?" he asked, incredulous. "You are bonded to Litharax," Solinar said. "The Starlance will respond to your connection, amplifying its power. There is no one else." Jake looked at Litharax, who nodded solemnly. "This is our destiny, Jake." Jake sighed, the enormity of the moment weighing on him. "All right. Let's do this." As the Allied fleet prepared for battle, Jake and Litharax entered the Starlance. The ship's cockpit pulsed with energy, its controls a mix of alien technology and organic design. Jake strapped in, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the controls. "Are you sure this will work?" Jake asked, glancing at the glowing runes on the console. "It will," Litharax replied, his voice steady. "Trust the bond." The ship launched, and Jake's stomach lurched as the Starlance shot into the void, joining the fleet. Thousands of Shipserithian vessels, scavenged freighters, and fighters from allied worlds formed a shimmering line in the nebula, their engines glowing against the encroaching darkness. The Void Shadows advanced, their obelisks blotting out the stars. Tendrils of black energy lashed out, consuming smaller ships that strayed too close. The battle began with a deafening clash, weapons lighting up the nebula like a violent supernova. Jake piloted the Starlance with a focus he didn't know he possessed, weaving through waves of enemy ships. Litharax, in his dragon form, flew alongside him, his fiery breath carving through the Void Shadow's forces. "Hold steady," Litharax said. "The core is close." Jake's eyes flicked to the ship's scanner, which displayed a massive signature ahead. The Nexus core loomed in the distance, a monolithic vessel that dwarfed even the largest Erythian ships. Its surface writhed with dark energy, and its presence seemed to sap the light from the surrounding nebula. The closer they got, the harder the battle became. Waves of Void Shadow ships swarmed around the core, their weapons hammering the Allied fleet. Ships exploded around them, the losses mounting with every passing second. "Jake!" Litharax called. "The bond, use it." Jake closed his eyes, reaching out with his mind. He felt the bond surge, a connection that extended beyond Litharax to the Starlance itself. The ship responded, its systems coming alive with a burst of energy. Jake opened his eyes, and the world seemed to slow. He could see the enemy ship's movements, predict their attacks, and maneuver with surgical precision. "I've got this," Jake muttered, his confidence growing. The Starlance pierced through the enemy lines, its energy weapons carving a path to the Nexus core. Litharax roared, unleashing a torrent of blue fire that cleared the remaining defenses. They were almost there. As they approached the core, it unleashed a massive pulse of dark energy. The shockwave rippled through the nebula, disabling Allied ships and scattering their formations. The Starlance shuddered, its systems flickering. "We're losing power," Jake shouted. "Not yet," Lithorax growled. He extended his claw, touching the console, and a surge of his energy flowed into the ship. The system stabilized, and Jake pushed the Starlance forward. The core loomed before them, its surface covered in pulsating black veins. Jake aimed for a glowing fissure, a weak point Lithorax had identified. "Now, Jake," Lithorax commanded. Jake activated the Starlance's primary weapon, a concentrated energy lance designed to pierce even the strongest defenses. The weapon fired, a blinding beam of light that struck the core directly. The fissure exploded, sending shockwaves of light and darkness rippling across the battlefield. The Void Shadow's ships faltered, their movements erratic. One by one, they began to collapse, their forms dissolving into nothingness. The Allied fleet cheered as the tide of battle turned in their favor. The Nexus core erupted in a final, cataclysmic explosion, its dark energy consumed by the light of the Starlance's weapon. The Void Shadows were defeated, their presence in the nebula erased. Jake slumped back in his seat, his body trembling with exhaustion. "We did it," he whispered. Lithorax's voice was calm, yet filled with pride. "Yes, but this is only the beginning." Back on the Celestra Nexus, the survivors gathered to celebrate their victory. Soliner approached Jake and Lithorax, his crystalline form glowing brighter than before. "You have given us hope," Soliner said. "The Void Shadows are weakened, but they are not gone. Will you continue the fight?" Jake looked at Lithorax, then back at Soliner. "We'll fight wherever we're needed." The dragon's eyes gleamed. "Together, we are unstoppable." As the stars shimmered in the distance, Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore, he was a guardian, bonded to a dragon, and destined to protect the galaxy. The Battle of the Orion Nebula was over, but the war for the cosmos had only just begun.